now in a navigable state throughout the banks, having sustained but little damage through the winter, or by the freshets this spring. By reference to our marine list, it will be seen that there have already been several arrivals and departures, and we understand there is a prospect of full employment at the present for all boats on the canal, which have now become numerous. The navigation between this town and Providence is suspended at the present time, in consequence of repairs which are making to a lock in the vicinity of the Blackstone factory in Mendon. It is hoped that the repairs will be completed so that the boats may resume their trips in the course of this week. Most of the boats are on the lower end of the route, where there is a large amount of freight ready to be brought up, which is now much wanted.
Hi, I'm Ranger Chuck Arning with the National Park Service here in the John H. Chafee Blackstone River Valley National Heritage Corridor. And even in the wintertime, as cold as it was, they were working on building the Blackstone Canal. The only difference was, instead of digging trench, they were cutting stone. Stone for locks, stone for culverts, stones for bridges, stones for canal basins. Anything that required stone, they were cutting during the winter. And part of the reason for that was your stonemasons were highly talented, trained craftsmen. And you wanted to keep them employed all year long because you want to lose them to the competition. So we're here in Blackstone River and Canal Heritage State Park, Lock 25 of the canal in the Goat Hill area, and it's a marvelous place to take a look at and really understand how the lock was actually built. It's a pretty remarkable piece of work here as we look at the marvelous cut stone. Now, we're on the Uxbridge-North Bridgetown line. We're getting ready to head north as we continue to discover and uncover the hidden Blackstone Canal. Well, folks, I bet you figured by now that we've been looking for the canal in Massachusetts far longer than we were looking for the canal in Rhode Island. Well, there are a couple of obvious reasons for that. The first one is there are more canal miles in Massachusetts than in Rhode Island. The second one is a little bit more difficult to figure out. Rhode Island has always been far more industrialized than Massachusetts. You think about Slater Mill in 1790. Well, the industrialization of Rhode Island has had more mills, more dams, more people, more villages than Massachusetts. You'll begin to see that when the canal went out of business, it really got squeezed. If it wasn't used for an industrial process like a raceway, it really was buried and covered. Now we're here in downtown Woonsocket, and the Blackstone Canal left the river here underneath the Court Street Bridge and headed up Allen Street, and then it crossed over Market Square and re-entered the river above the Thunder Mist Dam. So you can see that the industrialization of this man-made built landscape was significant to force us to really try to understand where the canal is, because it's hard to see. Now, Massachusetts has similar issues in trying to uncover the canal, but for a very different reason.
The way our countryside has grown up in trees, you don't have the open views that they probably had when it was farmland, and we don't realize how close this is in many locations to places we might drive right by.
Right, and that's the other thing. Of course, you know, now these are quite overgrown areas, and for the most part back then, of course, it's got to be clear cut for the along the towpath side at the bare minimum.
Yeah.
And then the fact that so much of what's now forested countryside would have been clear cut back then as farmland. Now you might stumble across a canal segment that 150 years ago you would have seen from quite a distance away.
Right, and a very open landscape, not what we have today.
Well, the other reason the canal is hard to find in Massachusetts has to do with Mother Nature. Because if you look behind me here, this looks like the Blackstone River. And for all intents and purposes, it is. But in reality, it's the Blackstone Canal. You see, the river has broken through the towpath here with a great deal of velocity, and turn this portion of the canal into another branch to the Blackstone. And for paddlers, that's quite an issue because you don't want to go down here. There's all kinds of blowdowns and other aspects of it because the power of water is a significant force. Don't forget, the reason why the Blackstone Valley is a significant historical area has to do with the water power that generated power for all the mills. And this is one area where we really want to have some preservation funding come in to repair the towpath here and then take care of many of these blowdowns because for paddlers it is a huge obstacle. Without that fix, without repairing this towpath here, we will not be able to recognize this as a canal very much longer. It will be the river. Now, if you remember, our goal here, uncovering the hidden Blackstone Canal, is to take a look at the canal the way it is today and try to find it, versus what it looked like back in 1828. And our good friends, Dr. Rick Greenwood of the Rhode Island Historical Preservation and Heritage Commission, and my colleague, Ranger Kevin Kleiberg, are at the Rhode Island Historical Society's library in Providence with a beautiful Phelps 1828 as-built map. It's a wonderful artifact. Each page is 2 feet long. So they're looking at that map to try to figure out how the canal was built, and I'm out here in the field trying to show you where we can find of it today. The difference is, I don't think they need mosquito repellent, but I don't have to wear those white gloves. So this is a perfect opportunity to talk about Plummer's Landing and have them do all the work.
This is Church Street in Northbridge, heading up the hill. Now this way would be heading towards Whitensville, so this is quite an important connection there. We'll notice that there's a lock that's located just north of the bridge there, and this is Plummer's Landing.
Right.
And so today, a portion of that lock is still there, being used as the footings for the bridge that carries the now modern Church Street across the canal, which is still partially watered at that point. It's not quite yet on this map because it would be a few more years, but Israel Plummer builds his storehouse right here at the canal site, and it was a spot where obviously commerce coming mostly towards Whitensville, which again it says just off the map here,
Right.
And also into central Northbridge. What's fascinating is that Plummer was certainly a man to follow the ways of change, because when the canal goes out of business, he moves his store about a half mile and builds it right along the sides of the railroad track. And so he stayed in the same business, just moving from one form of transportation to the other.
Well, I want to expand on what Kevin and Rick were talking about Plummer's Landing here. This is the canal basin right by the foundation for the store. And something doesn't quite look right here. It looks rather small compared to the fact that the boats were 72 feet long and they kind of turned around here. And our guess is that maybe the landfill, which is currently being capped, actually spewed over in this and filled in part of this canal basin. The result being it's a lot smaller now than it might have been back in the day when it was an active canal stop. So this is one of those great opportunities for archaeologists to get involved here and do some digging, and who knows what we'll find. Gene Burnett and his company, Cover Technologies, fix things, mostly landscapes gone bad. Here in Northbridge, they're capping the landfill. They've also cleaned out the canal trench of all the debris, restored the banks, took down some trees that were eroding the towpath, and with some vegetation clearing by our friends at Mass Department of Conservation and Recreation, you'll get an excellent view of what the canal would have looked like in the 1830s. This is pretty scenic right here. This is a nice, secluded part of the canal that is totally cut off from the rest of the canal by the railroad. As they were building the Providence and Worcester Railroad back in 1847, they cut the canal and straightened out the river. You know, it's not fun getting obsolete. You know, it's really nice when you stumble across an artifact within the landscape that authenticates one of the stories we've been told. For example, what happened to all the canal locks here along the canal? Well, this is clearly, because of its rounded nature, a piece of the Blackstone Canal lock. We most likely from Dunn's Lock, which was just the other side of Riverdale Mill. And what took place is that because of all the obligations and creditors they had, because the canal company lost every legal suit they ever had, that they would take the physical assets, which were canal locks and other parts of the canal, and relocate them, and that would satisfy a claim, a debt. And so as part of a foundation here, we have this lovely canal remnant that's sitting here in the landscape and speaks to us of a story that we've always heard, but now we can authenticate.
We have two segments here, or two modern mill villages here, only one of which is on the map, and that's under a different name. Where Dunn's Pond is would be Riverdale, and where we have Holbrook's Village here in the center segment of the map would be modern Rockdale. But for Riverdale, for example, is a tremendous change in what we see there today. Although there are segments of the canal which are still there, the construction of a dam across the river there has eliminated much of the islands that we see there and changed the...
So this has all been flooded.
A big chunk of that has been flooded out, and then several generations of mill power trenching has also altered the landscape a bit. Now it's also interesting there, it almost seems like they built a towpath in the middle of the pond.
I think they must have, right. This certainly looks like a causeway, probably built of earth, that is coming across here and using existing islands as anchor points,
Yeah.
right. And yeah, that's quite a long stretch. But one of the advantages, of course, is that they seem to have been able to use a lot of the existing river channel to do that.
Absolutely.
Here's a beautiful open spot along the canal and river. I want to say the canal is there, and this is the towpath we're standing on. This is the Blackstone Miracle. Sometimes there's some hidden gems out here. If you get out and just do a little exploring, you stumble across, you see how beautiful the Blackstone River really is. Fall's a great time to be out and about. And it does reveal to us pieces of the landscape here. I think this is a towpath, not only because this is where they put the sewer line, but there's some rocks we'll come across along the side here. They clearly have been placed, and they're not the new cut stone we find from some of the quarries. They look much older. Here, I'll show you. Here's a good example of what I was talking about, the size of these stones and their placement. Look here, and I'll try to avoid some of this poison ivy here. You see the cuts here. This is the kind of stone that the canal workers placed right here to protect the towpath, because the power of the river coming in here could clearly wash this away, and often did. In the spring, I had a lot of crews come out here to fix the towpath and any other damage that had taken place. So we're going to follow these stones as we head further up, as we towards the Rockdale.
It's still pick and shovel and wheelbarrow work being done by men working very hard with nothing but their muscles to keep them going. But digging, whether you're digging out or building up, it's still has to be done with a fair amount of precision.
And it almost looks like something similar being done here, just north of modern Rockdale, where, again, this looks like a segment where perhaps they filled in a good-sized pond there. And I noticed that they made sure they had the stream flowing in on the canal side, though, to take advantage of that extra source of water.
That water source, right. And yeah, it must have been tricky because those were swampy areas, and it couldn't have been easy work for the for the workmen to lay the foundations and get that to hold. And that clearly is a case where in times of flood, my guess is these causeways would have been very vulnerable to erosion.
Well, we can also see Holbrook's Village. At this point, you know, it's quite a sizable holding along the river. Again, we can see the dam located there, and again, it's matching lock.
It's matching lock. We see the raceway coming off here and the mill itself entering back in.
And then this would be the Central Turnpike heading its way west towards Sutton Center at this point. So a connection there as well. So a few other landmarks that are here on the map for us to follow our way around.
Right, and one of the great advantages of having water power develop and then use a water-based transportation system is these things are very closely allied. The railroad takes advantage of that and just doesn't have to follow the water, but follows the existing patterns of settlement and industry that are already there. And so the canal, to a certain extent, helped just reinforce that pattern, and then the railroad just copied what it had done.
But one interesting exception there is when you look at the stretch which is now the state park, the reason that is parkland and was not developed was the fact that Whitensville, just off the river, just off the Blackstone River, but on the Mumford River, was the much larger industrial center, and so the railroad goes to Whitensville and then heads back to Riverdale and Rockdale, and so there's that one little 4-mile stretch of the river which is railroadless and thus left as open space that today we are fortunate to have as parkland. So
now, Kevin, I've lost count, but it looks to me like we've got another mill village here.
Yes, well, we've reached Farnhamsville, which, as we can see, was already a going concern by the time the canal came along. Again, a dam built across the river, and the mill village that's there.
Factory
and
here.
We can see the tail race.
Right, coming back down into the river.
Or at least he didn't draw in the head race. It's always interesting to see where he's got things sketched in, but not filled in all the way. And then we have a lock right here. Where are we? About 33
Right,
miles.
we're into the 34th mile at this point.
Yeah.
And right, that's the first lock we've seen in a while. So
Right.
our elevation is going up,
Going up.
as we see with the dam here.
Yep.
Well, folks, we are here in South Grafton, right, in the Farnsville area, and we're with some of our good friends in the valley who are taking us on a tour to show us pieces of the Blackstone Canal that most of you have never seen before. We got Ed Hazard here and Phil Gothier, and Phil is a former fire chief here in town. But what they're going to explain to us about the canal here is how it was reused. Now, Phil, give us an idea of what we have behind us.
What happened here was after the canal, they stopped using the canal when they put the railroad in. The mill took this pond, took this area over, and they fixed it up so they could filter their water from the Blackstone River or the canal, and they put it through a filtration system, which down further here, we can see where they filtered the water. Then it was taken from there and it was pumped back up to a white building where they had some more filtration beds. And they would take that water and they would use it to wash the cloth, dye the cloth, and dispose of it. And this is what they reused the canal for. And it was back whenever they brought the railroad in. I can't tell you when that was, but...
No, we're talking 1848, 1850s when the province of Worcester was...
Then that's what they did. Waskennet Mill, it was a Worcester mill. And they dyed all their cloth, they wove their cloth there. They did everything in the mill, and they dyed it, whoever the people wanted it, the customers, what color they wanted, they dyed it that color for them. It could have been red, it could have been blue, could have been brown. During World War II, they made army blankets and blankets for the Navy, and they dyed them brown and they dyed them blue, and they did it right there in the mill, and then they dried it and they cut the blankets the size they needed, and they shipped them out.
Now, one of the interesting things here in South Grafton is that this has been one of the more industrial areas of the Blackstone Valley, particularly in Massachusetts, because in 1828, Peter Farnham and his sons were building a mill over here that we're referred to as the Waskenut Mill,
right.
J.G. O'Donnell.
Right.
And at the same time they were building a mill, the Irish were right here digging the canal. And so it's an interesting story that they've always had industrial presence here. A lot of places in Massachusetts, the canal was in a very rural, secluded area. If you just go south of here, you know, there weren't any mills there yet. The mills came after in the 30s. But here, there was a mill going up the same time they were digging the canal, which is kind of a fascinating part of the story. So the interesting thing is here, after the canal went out of business and the railroads came in, which is 1848, they built a dam here, turned this into a pond.
Right.
So you think the dam actually was that early?
Oh yeah.
I mean, because I guess
well, then they
the
built
mill would need the water.
Then they built a dam down at the mill. They built a dam at the mill, and they used it to generate their own power.
And so this was used for water for mill processing then.
Right.
Mill operations, dyeing, other kinds of
That's
cleaning.
right. Process their product that they wove in the mill. They did everything there. They did the yarn. They did the whatever you had to do to weave it. They did it. They had a weave shop, and they wove all their stuff there, right there. And then they shipped it out wherever it had to go. They worked most of the time. They were all during the war. They worked 3 shifts.
So these filtration pits were really there to clean the water.
Right. Before they took it from here and they brought it to the filtration plant that we showed you on the way down, that white building. Down in the basement, I don't know if they're still, I think they took them out. There was, they had a filtration bins in there. You know, they filtered the water and then they took it from there and they brought it over to the dye house. And they dye, you know, that's where they use it to wash the cloth and mix the dye and everything else.
It's kind of interesting because if we think about this, you know, north of us, there's a lot of heavy metal. There's Washburn and Moen, was in business for a long time. You have Felters up in Millbury. You have a number of mills up there. They're all producing material, and they're all dumping their stuff into the Blackstone River, which is one of the reasons why it was the most polluted river, industrial river in America for a long time.
Well, the thing is, Millbury, Felter's mill, when they used to dye their felt, we could tell what color they dyed because you could see it. It come right down here, right down to Blackstone. Come right down and boom.
The color from here went on down.
Down, kept going out,
right?
down to Providence.
Yeah. Well, it's pretty interesting that they could all use the water again and again.
Well, I know, but they
somehow get away with it.
What we're learning from Phil here is they had a very intricate filtration process
system
here to clean the water so they could use it, and it was up to the next guy downriver to figure out how they could clean the water.
Right.
Again.
Yeah.
But if we can take a walk down there, we'll show you where they had the filtration system. What it was the pipes come out of the ground, and it didn't spin. It just sprayed the water, and it went into like crushed stone or gravel, and it went back into a pit, and they took the water from there and they just pumped it down here.
I had no idea it was so elaborate.
No, it's one of the amazing reuses of the canal here is because there's a pump up here.
Yeah, it's still there.
And there's some of the electrical.
The other building is where all the electrical power came into to run that pump.
Well, let's head down this way and take a look at some of those
Okay,
filtration pits.
very good.
You guys lead the way.
All right.
In this case, the ranger will follow. All right, Phil, what does this landscape talk to us today? What are we seeing here?
It tells us where this green you see over here, that was like filter beds that they picked up from that pumping station, brought it over here, pumped it through the pipes. The pipe filtered out through the air. The water came down, went into a gravel bed, and then it would filter, and then would be taken back to the white building. As you look close enough in the water here, you can see a lot of gravel down there.
Yeah, I see that.
And this, what happened here is there used to be an earth dam in the back here. And after one flood we had, that was the end of that, and it took care of everything right here. It just moved everything right out of here.
Right down to the gravel.
Right down to the gravel, and it ties into the Blackstone River down further.
Now, there's another part of the story here that we probably should talk a little bit about, and that has to do with the Grafton Land Trust preserving this piece of the canal by purchasing, what, 14 acres here?
Yeah,
it was a gift, actually.
It was a gift.
The fellow that owns the white building, he owned his property, and he didn't want it no more, so he From what I understand,
Yeah.
he gave the
Harry
land trust-
Kotzius, what, about 5 years ago, I think, he gave it to us as a gift. And one interesting thing about this story is that we came here to see if there was any industrial waste, because we didn't want to have a property that was full of whatever, although along the river it's pretty inevitable that there are pollutants. And so we came across this pump, and the first thought was, oh my gosh, this is an oil pump, there must be oil tanks, what are we going to do? So luckily, I got hold of Phil Platt, you know,
Yep.
because he's a local engineer who works for Norton and is very interested in industrial history. And he referred me to Phil Gauthier, and turned out Phil knew the whole story. So that we knew it was water and we knew everything was fine. And but I think I have the feeling that no one would have really noticed that pump house was still here unless we'd done that exercise. And now this is, what, 14 acres of land that's preserved, and we're planning to put a trail so that people can kind of make a loop down along the canal and then back along the river. And we'd like to preserve the pump house. I mean, obviously not the whole house, but just the pumping operation, so that people will, in the future, know that it'll still be here, and that little piece of the story will actually have a little something to remind people of. And now we're in a new phase where we don't need this land for industry, and we'd like to keep it for habitat and recreation.
Well, this has been Ranger Chuck Arning with the National Park Service here in the John H. Chafee Blackstone River Valley National Heritage Corridor. And on the way up from Providence along the canal, I'm reminded of two important pieces of the Blackstone Valley, one of which is the amazing innovation to reuse the canal once it went out of business. From housing today to pieces of old mills and raceways, even to the water that was used to clean the fabric and in the dyeing process. The folks here in the Blackstone Valley have found ways to reuse the canal and make it a viable part of the landscape well after it went out of business. The other piece is just how wonderful the relationship we have, rangers that is, with the folks here in the Blackstone Valley. Throughout the landscape of the Blackstone Valley, the people have taken the time to share with us their stories, their remarkable insights into the industry that happened here. They share their stories, their special places within our communities that allow us to understand the story of industry, the story of innovation, and the story of hardship and labor working in the Blackstone Valley. It's a wonderful place to work, and it's a lot of fun. Which reminds me, I had better get back to work because I still have 3 more towns and probably 17 more locks to try to find as we make our way up to Worcester to the old turning basin in downtown. So until next time, I hope to see you in the valley.